Okay, will you prompt us for who's going now?
Yep, I can do that. All right, so I am RM Archer and I blog at Scribes and Archers. And over the past month or so, I've been doing a series on Christian authors and Christian and its importance and how to encourage it and that sort of thing. So this week, to wrap it up, I wanted to get together some Christian authors to talk about the experience of writing as a Christian and some responses to that and that sort of thing. So, hi everyone, how are y'all?
Good, how are you?
Doing well. All right, so do you want to start with talking a little bit about yourselves and what you write? Mandy, do you want to start?
Sure. I write young adult variety, like fantasy and sci-fi or contemporary and sci-fi, kind of mix up the genres a little bit. So that's kind of what I do with all of my books.
Mattie? Mattie seems to be frozen. Oh, there we go.
I do historical fiction. Basically, I just think history is really important, and it doesn't seem like very many young people write it, at least that I know of, although I'm finding more. But yeah.
All right. Brian.
Okay, I didn't know if I was supposed to just go or anyway. I write mostly contemporary, but I kind of dabble in all sorts of genres, honestly, except for the non-Christian ones. But I write, my 3 published books are contemporaries, but then my current work in progress is kind of diving into a little bit of the surrealism a little bit, not fantasy or anything. I guess it might fall more into contemporary fantasy. Anyway, so I'm just kind of like dipping my toes in that. My NaNoWriMo novel's just a young adult thriller. I have some dystopian, apocalyptic, sci-fi, all sorts of fun stories that I just have ideas for that I want to write in the future. So yeah.
Cool. So why do y'all write what you write, and what do you hope to achieve through your work? Andy?
Again?
Yep.
Okay. I mostly write young adult fiction because growing up, I couldn't find a lot of it that I wanted to read, especially in, the older teen section. Mm-hmm. It's pretty hard to find clean fiction that's stuff you want to actually read. It's not just your standard cookie cutter, cringy Christian fiction. So I really wanted to write clean books that are still fun and, had that gripping factor that traditional books do, that didn't have all the gore and the sex and all the nastiness in it.
Mattie?
I write historical fiction because I think history is really important, and I really love history, and I love researching things and finding out just the little tiny details that no one else really knows about, and then weaving them into a story with characters that are my own creation, going through these events that took place so long ago but need to be remembered and talked about still, because history is the key to understanding now, and if we don't know what happened then we're going to repeat the mistakes of the past.
So I write mostly just because I feel like the Lord's put stories on my heart, and also to share experiences, because I know, like for myself, seeing certain experiences and stories that I've also experienced has been very encouraging, and it's helped me to develop and grow through those experiences. So I kind of write to share experiences and give people that story that they can relate to, that can uplift them, that can encourage them, that can challenge them, and that can just leave them hope for the future. Yeah.
Are there any genres, topics, etc., that you choose to avoid writing about, Andy?
Like things like supernatural things or paranormal things like that. So that's not really my scene. So I tend to avoid those kind of things in my work. Other than that, I'm fairly open to stuff. I don't have a problem writing sci-fi or fantasy. I'm not super into like the heavier side of fantasy, I guess I'd say, like the witches and dark magic, stuff like that. That's not really my thing. But I'm open to most things.
Yeah. Mattie?
I pretty much stick with historical fiction. I don't really like fantasy because I guess I like things in the real world. Although a fantasy world can be based in the world, I just feel like when you have your own creation of world, you come across some theological problems with a basis for good and evil, right and wrong, because you don't have that in your own world, I guess. And I like to incorporate the gospel into my writing because and having it in the historical era that really happened, events that really happened, and people going through actual struggles that really happened. I have an opportunity to do that. But aside from that, I think I'm pretty open to trying different things.
I like how we've got a really diverse selection of writers here. That's really cool. But I usually like Miranda, I do avoid the witches and wizards and all that stuff. I don't dabble in that kind of stuff. But even when I do write fantasy, I'm very careful too with how I present things, because I don't want it to, even like with using the word magic, I try to find ways not to use the word magic just because of the associations with it. Even if you created this really elaborate system of, it's a gift from the Lord or whatever. I know some Christian authors do that, but I don't know. I really try to avoid that just for the sake of keeping my story pure at heart for my own self. But yeah, that's probably the biggest thing that I stay away from. And then, of course, I think all of us can say this, like the really explicit genres, like I'm pretty sure we all stay away from those.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
On the flip side, are there any themes or topics that tend to come up a lot in your writing? Mandy?
I would say mine, definitely forgiveness is a big one. Even just learning to have grace even towards yourself, especially in the context of you're saved and you've had this saving grace happen in your life, and it's okay to now forgive yourself for the things that happened in the past. I definitely noticed with especially my contemporary series, The Whispers of White duology. It comes up a lot with Emma and Nathan. You just learn to, he kind of teaches her the importance of forgiveness and learning to let go of those things and step into grace rather than condemnation.
Mattie?
I guess in Everlasting Gold, I picked a theme that seemed to fit with what I was writing. So since it takes place right before the Civil War, I have two brothers that are on opposing sides, and so I talk about forgiveness as they learn to come together, become actual brothers. And then I also follow on freedom, because the Civil War and kind of goes with slavery, as a lot of people think, although that's not the only thing. And so I followed those things on faith and trust. So I guess a lot of faith, and in even though you don't know the outcome or what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, the themes that come up a lot in the stories I write are, well, there's a lot of them. If you've ever read my books, you know that. But I deal a lot with like family bonds, whether blood or spiritual, emotional, whatever, like found family. I do deal a lot with those kind of bonds because that's something that's important to me personally. I also deal a lot with, write a lot about people who are dealing with trauma on some level, whether it's abuse or sexual assault or whatever it is. I do write a lot about people who are dealing with the aftermath of trauma, because I feel like that's a huge is in all these things that are happening, to kids and to young adults and stuff like that. So I feel like presenting that in a way that helps people heal is really important. So I do, on some level, like to bring up issues that are trauma related. But I also themes, on the positive side, I do deal a lot with themes of hope and faith, and how faith is actually really human experience. I know a lot of people make it out to be this big, grand, like super spiritual, existential. I don't know. A lot of authors make it to be like it's untouchable, almost like it's this just metaphysical event. But I really try to bring the human aspect into faith. Everyday people who are dealing with everyday problems, while also trying to keep or grow or rebuild their faith. So that's a really huge theme that shows up in ways big and small throughout what I write.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked a little bit about like content we avoid and stuff. Do y'all ever feel pressure from like the outside world to include more socially and politically acceptable content in your work? And if so, how do you deal with that pressure? Andy?
I don't think I ever have. I guess it's probably because I have such a solid home base in regards to that. My whole family, my, close family, my extended family, we're all Christian. So I kind of grew up in that atmosphere of having a really solid, like, grounding stone, I guess, against that kind of thing. So it's never really come up for me personally, but I have worked with people who have struggled with that a little bit. So I guess not for me, but I have seen it happen and have tried to come up with ways to help combat it, even in my own work, even if I don't personally struggle with that.
Mattie?
I haven't had a whole lot of struggles in that area, besides like in Everlasting Hope I had a lot of different races, people groups, what we like to call them. But and a couple people have asked me if my next one is going to have focus on a particular people, because it obviously needs that, but it doesn't to me, and it's not something I'm going to put into my writing if I don't want to.
Yeah.
So for me, I actually do get a lot of pressure. It doesn't happen like all at once and all the time or anything, but over the last couple of years since I released my first book, have received a lot of pressure, not from family or anything, but from like just readers and fans and followers on Instagram and Goodreads. And mostly it's about representation of like LGBT. That's pretty much the one thing that just pops up consistently. People want me to write about these characters, and I'm just like, I can't do that. Like, I don't feel tempted to at all. But I think it probably started in my second book, Every Bright and Broken Thing, when I did have a character that was questioning, but never like gave into that. And so it probably upset people, and they're like, are you going to write, this and whatnot? And I'm just like, no, I can't do that. So I try to be pretty respectful about it. Like, I'm not gonna put other people down or anything, and if they ask, I'm gonna tell them the truth. But I'm not gonna go out of my way to, like, I guess, slam them in what they're looking for. But I do try to direct them to, if this is what you're looking for, there are plenty of books that do this, but mine is not going to be one of them.
Is there anything that you regret including or not including in any of your books? Mandy?
Not off the top of my head. I usually think it through. I mean, when it takes 10 drafts to finish a book,
Yeah.
I usually think through all the things I would like to include. And if I missed something, I can go back and layer it in later. So I don't think I have in my published works. I know I'm still working on it a little bit in the ones that I'm currently writing, layering in things that I missed the first few times writing it and that kind of thing. But usually by the time I get to the publication stage, I've gone through enough drafts that I've been able to add in what I've wanted to.
Mm-hmm. Mattie?
I can't really think of anything. There might have been like a couple historical things that one thing did have to get deleted out of Everlasting Gold that I was disappointed about, but overall, I think I'm able to get in what I want to get in, and I don't think I have any regrets.
I don't think there's much for me that I would have either excluded or included. I'm sure there are scenes and stuff that I might have added. I think specifically in my first novel, if I were to go back and like create a second edition, I might add some more scenes to expand a little bit on what happened, just to be based on my own growth now as a writer, but nothing as far as regret.
All right, so in my first blog post of this series, I kind of described two ends of the Christian fiction spectrum, where there's like really clean fiction and there's more raw fiction. Do you ever feel like you can't go too far to the other end of the spectrum for branding reasons? And is that something that's been a struggle for you? And if so, how have you handled it? Andy?
Well, I usually write the more raw stuff. I know especially my Whispers of White duology has a reputation for being a little grungy and a little rough because it's told from the perspective of an unsaved girl who went through something really traumatic. So it was really more on the emotionally difficult side.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really hard for me to publish at first because I was afraid of what people would think with telling that story, but it was also really important to me. But I know like at one instance I can think of off the top of my head was my great aunt called my aunt after she read it, the first part of it, and was like, "Is Mandy okay? Like is she suicidal?" And my aunt had to be like, no, you just have to finish reading it. Mm-hmm. So I think I do have a little bit of that pressure to keep it a little on the cleaner side, and not even necessarily clean like, the yuckier stuff, just emotionally clean, because I worry a little bit about what people will think if I go to that darker end. But at the same time, I think a lot of really important stories are told over there. Mm-hmm. And in the case of Echoes and Mirage especially, I've had people contact me after reading it and say, this book saved my life. So I think it's important to go there, even if it is uncomfortable for me. But I would say that, yes, it definitely is sometimes.
Mattie?
I probably stay in the more cleaner side of things, but I know in my what I'm doing for now this year, I do have a character that's going to go through some not only physical but mental and emotional trauma because of the war. So I'm just a little nervous for that, but yeah, I think Everlasting Gold, I didn't really have anything going.
I think for me, I do get the pressure a lot from especially reviews after they've read my books. It's funny. I feel like sometimes I'm the definition of that Parks and Rec meme where Leslie's like, so you're too Christian, you're not Christian enough. You see the dilemma? That's kind of what I feel sometimes with my books. Because I don't like do profanity or explicit, sexuality or anything like that. But I do deal like Mandy with the more emotional and traumatic issues. Like my first book, Love in the Sea, was dealt a lot with depression, suicide, and self-harm. The second one dealt a lot with sexual trauma, and then the third one dealt a lot with domestic violence, and again, suicide and self-harm. And so I've had a lot of people on one side of it saying that it was too gritty, too raw, I should have toned it down. And I have people on the other side saying that I should have toned it up. So it's just like, I can't win. So I'm just going to write the story the way that I believe it needs to be written and just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Do you label your work as Christian fiction, and why or why not? Mandy?
I do not. Generally speaking, just because it's not explicitly Christian. In the case of Echoes, it definitely has a Christian subplot, but it's not the main characters. And personally, I never wanted to be a Christian author, a Christian fiction author. I wanted to be a Christian author.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't want to stick myself in a box when my whole goal was to write books that kids of any age, any background could read,
Mm-hmm.
and not have to worry about that content that they find in other books of the same genres. So I didn't put myself in that box because it wasn't what was put on my heart when I went to write. Instead, I felt called to write clean fiction in the sci-fi, fantasy, those kind of genres that kids could have access to without having to worry about all the content that the other ones have.
Mm-hmm. Mattie?
For Everlasting Gold is definitely Christian fiction, I'd say. So I would label it as a Christian historical fiction because it is very much Christian. It portrays the gospel. I'm not, for that one in particular, I'm not sure about my work in progress yet. We'll see.
I'm with Mandy on this one. I feel like I'm a Christian author, not a Christian fiction author. And some of that has to do with that, my own issues with the Christian fiction and traditional Christian publishing market right now. And others of it is just that it just doesn't really fit the box of what really constitutes Christian fiction in those markets.
Mm-hmm.
Like everything that's in that market is, very overtly, it's got a sermon and a point to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I don't really like write stories to make a point. Yeah, I think that's probably, the biggest thing that sets my work apart as a Christian author from like Christian fiction. So.
You kind of touched on this in the last question, but do you want or feel like you need to include God or a moral in every story you write? Mandy?
I feel like I do, even inadvertently. It isn't always purposeful, but when I go back and like reread the first drafts and stuff, I'll see those themes coming through just because it's so much part of my life. So I don't feel like I have to, but I feel like it happens even if I'm intentionally doing it or not. It's so much a part of me and my faith that it just comes through the fiction anyway.
Mm-hmm. Mattie?
I want to have at least a message and a moral theme that plays through the novel. I feel like it's important, but I'm not sure how well I executed it in Everlasting Gold, but I want to maybe be less direct or obvious, maybe like just have it more underlined and smooth. Maybe I'm not sure on the word, but
I think for me, I'm probably with Mandy again a bit on this one, but I do question sometimes, and I wrestle with, how much should I add, how much should I incorporate, as far as the faith element. Like, I want to make sure that it's God honoring. I want to make sure everything I write is God honoring, but I don't want to. I'm not really setting out to write a sermon in a book or anything. I'm just telling stories. So I always wrestle with it. I feel like if I were to go back and do Love in the Sea again, I might make that a little bit clearer, just because of the issues that it dealt with. It might need a little bit more clarity at the end. I'm not sure. That's just something I wrestle with as far as like what, reviewers have said. But I think there's always that part of me that's like, I should be doing more, just because I'm a perfectionist.
Yeah, same.
Have you come to understand God in new or deeper ways through the writing process? Mandy?
Yes, definitely. Especially when I was a lot younger, writing was a big way for me to connect to God. So I learned a lot about him through that, and even just subconsciously telling myself things about God through my work, things that I needed to hear and I wasn't hearing else, I would subconsciously weave into my writing and then be like, oh, that's my answer. And I definitely think that was a God thing.
Mattie?
I I think through especially writing historical fiction and looking at different historical events, just being constantly reminded that God is in control and that I don't really need to worry about what's going on around me because God's already planned it and He's written the story and He's writing my story, and so I don't need to worry, even though I still worry, but it's already planned, and in the end, it's all gonna glorify God and honor Him.
I think I definitely, as a writer, really, it just always brings me back to the fact that the Lord is the author of our stories. So it really just not the stories themselves, but the fact that I'm writing it all really helps connect me with that idea that the Lord's writing our story day by day, page by page. So it's a really powerful thing to realize.
What encourages you as a Christian author specifically?
I would definitely say people just showing interest in the stories and realizing what I was trying to do with them. A lot of times, like Brian has said, people misconstrue things or want you to do more or less. When people just understand the story and what you were trying to do with it, that really encourages me that, okay, I did a good job. People understand what I was trying to say here. And for me, that's a big encouragement and a big help. I actually have a sister who reads through it as I go writing and helps me come up with plots and themes and all of that stuff. And she's probably my biggest encouragement because she just takes the time to listen and understand what I'm trying to say about the story and how to execute it. And I think for me, that's probably the biggest help. So yeah, I just say definitely when people take the time to understand what the story's trying to say.
Mattie?
I think having people, other writers to talk to and get encouragement and ideas from has really helped me because I didn't have that for a while, and so I was just kind of like, I don't know what I'm doing. I didn't even like call myself a writer or anything because I didn't feel like I knew what I was doing, even though I had some idea, and I didn't tell people or advertise or anything tell friends or family that I like writing or what have you. But I think having people, and then also my family's been a big support. And sometimes one of my sisters and I will just remember we were laying in bed one night and we just came up for a plot for one of the plot lines and storylines in my current work in progress. So that was really fun having her, and she's helped me plot, and Daddy's helped me brainstorm a lot. He was a big part of Everlasting Gold and everything. So
I think for me, the biggest encouragement is family. They're always pushing me. My brother, sister, and I are always hashing out plots. Like literally the other day, spent hours talking about the plot of my upcoming young adult thriller trilogy. So they really helped me with that. And I think my other big encouragement is when people just tell me that, wow, this story saved my life. And that was especially prominent with Love in the Sea. Because it's when I had it on Wattpad, I got so many messages from people saying, wow, this gave me a reason to live, or it reconnected me with God and stuff like that. So that's honestly, when people tell me how moved they are by my stories, that's the goal. Like I don't necessarily need high reviews or anything. I just want people to be moved.
So if you encountered like pushback about what you include in your stories or that kind of thing, arguments against your particular writing choices, how have you come to disregard those where appropriate? Andy?
I had to learn that you can only listen to a set amount of voices. Everyone's going to think different things. You're going to have one person telling you this part of the book was too slow, and another person saying that part was rushed, and it's the same part.
Yeah.
People I trusted and respected give me feedback, because really there's too many opinions in the world. So if you listen to all of them, you're just going to get confused, and you're going to veer off trail with the story, and it's just going to hurt your stories instead of help them. So definitely reminding myself of that has helped a lot.
Mattie?
I don't think I've I feel like not a whole lot of people. I mostly just had positive people like it or whatever. Not a whole lot of critiquing, I guess, because I'm not that established. But yeah, in general.
I think for me, I just I've developed thicker and thicker skin over the years. So the negative reviews and the critics, they don't bother me. And I'm just kind of like, these people who are criticizing me, who are throwing hate, whatever, they haven't earned a voice in my life. They're just strangers on the internet. Sorry, swatting away a fly. But yeah, I think that it's just something that I've developed over the years, just knowing that, if these people, if they're, criticizing me for these things, then obviously I'm not their preference, their personal preference, and that's fine. They can move on and find somebody who is, and then two, that they may not have understood the heart of the story, and it's not my job to make them understand. It's my job to tell the story and just present it and let it fall where it is. So I just really just developed pretty thick skin as far as criticism. And I always try to, I know there's times where I feel like I could explain myself, like they'll comment on the negative reviews or whatever and just be like, hey, you're wrong. But I've always tried to practice just being quiet in the face of criticism. I think even though it's really hard sometimes, just keeping your mouth shut, like that's something I've always tried to put into practice.
All right, so if you've had the privilege of seeing your books make a positive impact, was it in the way that you would have imagined, or was it a surprise, or how did that go down? Mandy?
For me, it was definitely with Echoes was the first time it happened, and it definitely took me by surprise, because while the story had meant everything to me while writing it, I hadn't expected it to mean everything to someone else. But I had a girl reach out to me who was very suicidal, very depressed. She'd fallen away from her faith. And she reached out to me and said, "This brought me back to God. I'm going to go back to church. I've found him again." And to have that happen was both unbelievably surprising because I didn't expect it, and also really touching. So it definitely wasn't what I expected when writing the story, especially since I had got pushback about it from other Christians and saying, this is too dark, it's too grungy, it deals with too deep of things. And so to have it make a positive impact like that on someone else's life was a pretty awesome thing to happen.
I feel like for me, my grandma said it brought back a lot of memories for her of things that had happened, especially my character Angie. Just a lot of people really like her, I guess. And she said it kind of reminded her of when my sisters and I were little and doing things. So that was nice. But no one said it's like changed their life or anything.
I think it took me by surprise for the most part because it really started back with Loving the Sea when it was on Wattpad. It won the 2016 Waddies Award, and then literally over the course of a week, I went from a couple thousand reads to a couple 100,000 reads. So people were speeding through it, and then they were messaging me about what the story had done, how it had moved them, and revitalized their faith and revitalized their hope. So it took me by surprise, but I think it went above and beyond what I might have expected it to.
If you could change one thing about modern fiction, what would it be? Andy?
Probably definitely how commonplace a lot of content has become, especially in the younger age ranges. Like, it bothered me a lot younger because I couldn't be confident reading anything until I got into it and was sure it wouldn't have that just couldn't suddenly pop up out of nowhere. And I definitely think I'd change content things for books just because I would like to have some say over what I read and what content's in it, but there's not a lot of ways to filter that in modern day fiction. So when you pick up a book, you never know what you're going to get. So I think I would maybe change that about it.
Mattie?
I feel like specifically the historical fiction genre, people like to put things in there that didn't really happen, or put it in there because it fits today's agenda, or twist the story to twist the historical event to fit what they want it to fit. It happens a lot more recently that people are twisting events and saying, like in particular, one of my favorite historical figures, they say, oh, she's the first feminist, and da da. And I'm like, oh, not really. I mean, they go off a poem she wrote when she's 12, and I'm like, she's 12, and everything I've read about her is like she is the most devout Christian woman ever. And yes, she's strong, and yes, she stood up for what she believed, but that doesn't make her the feminist we want her to be. So I guess just leaving the historical notes and interpreting as they would have been then, and not how they should be now, to fit what they want it to be.
I think for me, it would be pretty simple. Just clean it up. Like, I'm tired of profanity riddling the pages of all these stories and explicit sexuality and stuff like that. It's just really frustrating. So yeah, I'd definitely clean it up.
Yep. What would you like to see from the Christian community, Christian writing community, whether content-wise or community-wise? Mandy?
I would definitely say I like them to start writing a broader set of genres.
Mm-hmm.
We're supposed to be a light to the world, and if we're sticking to just strictly Christian fiction and that's all we write, we're only touching other Christians. We're not reaching out to the rest of the world. And I'd like to see people of the Christians reaching out to the world more by putting out content that shines a light in a way that it can touch people beyond the already people who go to church.
Mm-hmm. Mattie?
I guess I'd like to see, I feel like a lot of people don't appreciate or like history, so they don't just leave historical fiction like, oh, that's boring. It already happened. Who cares? So, I mean, for a while, I mean, even just recently, I found more historical fiction writers that are, young and who love history and want to make it, who pay attention to historical detail and don't just say, oh, I don't feel like researching that anymore. But I feel like it's still a very lonely genre to write in. And so having more historical fiction authors to talk to for me would be nice, to say, ask historical like questions and their troubles with it when you can't find a historical fact, or were they born this year or this year, did they wear this back then? I don't know, who knows,
Yeah.
Did it really happen? I don't know, it's a legend, different things like that. So
I'd like to see a little more room made for smaller authors. I think one of my big issues with the Christian writing and publishing industry is that it's kind of the same big names just recycled over and over again. And many of those big names, I love their works, but it's just, there's very little room for, like, I know a Christian author who just retired from writing in his mid-30s after he wrote this fantastic Christian trilogy published by a big publishing house, but he couldn't make it big because he was being overshadowed and crowded out. There wasn't enough room for him. Everybody was pushing the next Ted Dekker, the next Karen Kingsbury. So I'd really like to see more room made for those that are just starting out, those that haven't built a platform yet. That would be really nice to see.
Mm-hmm. Who are some of your favorite Christian authors? Andy?
Definitely like Jonathan Flanagan's books. He's only written one series for a younger audience, and that are in novel form. He mostly does devotionals, but his one series that he wrote is a retelling of King David as if it was set in the Deep South, and it is phenomenal. I really love it. So I really like his books. I'm a fan of D. O'Malley, especially, is one of my favorites. I like Lori Wick's books. Some of them are pretty great. And those are probably my three main ones.
Mattie?
I personally really like Douglas Bond's historical fiction. He does a really good job of keeping it historical and still having a really engaging and enjoyable characters and plot line. And I like the historical events he covers. I also really like, it's not historical fiction, but more like a mystery kind of suspense contemporary. The Baker Family series by Sierra Hedgecock are really fun. My sisters and I really love them. And I also really like Echoes. And I still need to get Mirage, but so Miranda Marie too.
I think my favorite is probably C.S. Lewis, him and J.R.R. Tolkien. Those two really just kind of changed my life. I actually just finished reading The Fellowship of the Ring for the first time a month or so ago, and it was just incredible. So those two, and then Andrew Peterson, he's a huge one for me. I know he's not as well known, but his Wing Feather Saga just absolutely just tore me apart and put me back together. Like that series was so good. And Donita K. Paul, I have to give her a shout out because she was actually the first, her Dragon Keeper Chronicles was the first fantasy series I ever read. And it just, it really opened my world up to the potential for fantasy. So, those are my main Christian authors.
Okay, so I'm actually out of questions, but we still have a few minutes. So is there anything any of y'all wanted to say before we wrap up? All right. All right. Well, thank y'all for coming. And I'll put y'all's links in the description of the video and everything. This was really cool. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It was really, really fun.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Bye. Have a good rest of your day.